close and personal, respond, again, to the issues that are part of our women's agenda. So as a result of that, we wanted to do a follow-up, right? So we did all this work getting the information out. We had a selection, we had the election, and so now we're into transition. But we wanted to have our political smarties come and analyze what happened for us. And so I think we got two good presenters today. And I'm going to turn the mic over to Sylvia and to Betty to get us started.
Thank you. And I'm Sylvia. Don't need to know too much more about me. I'm going to turn it over to Betty to introduce Delmarie. And I believe Delmarie's here. And then I think that Judith is introducing AD. So take it away, Betty.
Okay, so I'm going to be really quick. I've known Delmarie a really long time. We worked together in the Jackson 88 political campaign, but I knew her mom before that. But more than that, aside from her having been a TV personality in Indiana and the very first African-American female to be the head of communications for the Democratic National Committee, I believe that was in '96. She is a prolific analyst when it comes to political campaigns and the like. And whenever there is an election, they always go to Delmarie and ask her, what's your take on this? So I'm real excited to hear what her take is on this last week's election. Without going any further, I introduced you Delmarie Cobb, who is I believe president is the title of the Publicity Works.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Delmarie, I'm going to circle to you. The way this is going to work, we're going to have a great conversation with you and AD. I could have said I've known you forever too. But it's lovely to see you.
Thank you.
And I'm going to turn it over to Jackie or to Judith to introduce AD. And AD has some slides we'll share later, but I'm just giving you all a heads up so we could prepare that. You're on mute, Judith.
I have a dog, so I have to make sure that he's not participating. So I'm very happy to welcome AD Quig, who covers Cook County government, City Hall, and the Obama Presidential Center for the Tribune, which she joined in 2022. And prior to that, she covered politics for Crane, Chicago Business, and the Daily Line. She is from South Bend, Indiana. So Indiana is a good feeder for us. And she has a degree in journalism from Indiana University. So we're happy to meet you and to join us and to give us your insights, because I know you have seen this on a day-to-day basis. So welcome.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thank you both. We're really lucky to have strong, smart women that have been in the game, different generations, different perspectives, different parts of town. We couldn't be in better company. So the way this is going to work, I've got a few questions for both of you, space for you individually. AD, you have some slides. I don't know, we can try to tee those up. I've emailed them. But this question is for both of you, and I'm going to come to Delmarie first. So were you surprised by the outcome? And explain yourself either way.
So thank you for having me tonight. I appreciate it. I don't know that I was surprised by the outcome because early on, Brandon mentioned to me 3 years ago that he planned to run for mayor. And I said, oh, you do? And so I just sort of filed it in the back. And I knew another person who was running from the West Side. And somebody kept asking me to do their campaign. And I kept saying, no, I'm trying to wait to see who's in the field because I knew they had the same base. And I couldn't imagine that they would both run for mayor. So during the first half, when we had everybody running, I just said to my friends, don't just vote because you know somebody. I said, really think this through, because it's going to be a runoff, and you need to think, who would you like to see in the runoff in terms of making it to the end? And for a lot of people, it was Brandon that they really decided to go for versus someone they knew, or they just wanted to help out somebody because they liked them, or they had met them, or they were in the same sorority with them or fraternity with them. And so when it became Brandon and Vallis, of course, it was very close all the way, and it could have gone either way. And you saw the money coming in for Vallis. But, you know, Hope, I came out a week ahead and actually endorsed Brandon, hoping that Chicago would do what it was supposed to do and step up and throw away the shackles of the past.
Thank you. That is a very thoughtful response. AD, same question to you.
I was only surprised in both rounds of this election, because as a semi-young student of Chicago history, I thought of the incumbency advantage as a really important one. So when Mayor Lori Lightfoot didn't make it, I knew her polling was bad. I knew she was in rough shape. I knew she was going to get torn apart in the early weeks of the election. But I thought, maybe in the back of my head, that, you know, incumbency matters a lot. So maybe she'll make it to the runoff. Maybe she'll make it to the runoff in second place. Didn't happen. Second round, like Delmarie said, I had seen how much money was going to Vallis, how the business community was lining up behind him, how it seemed like older voters were lining up behind him, how excited very high turnout wards like the 41st and the 19th and downtown and just north of it were turning out. So I figured if he wrapped up enough high turnout wards and used his money wisely, he had a really good shot. But the Chicago Teachers Union and its affiliated unions are never to be underestimated. They have had so many recent victories, legislatively, electorally, and I knew from reporting on a bunch of aldermanic races that they had kind of a really powerful ground game network that could push it in Brandon's favor. And I think he also just had kind of a groundswell of excitement from progressives about what could be. And I think that's why we saw a little bit higher turnout in youth vote. When I talked to friends who are around my age or a little bit older, who were excited to vote, they were excited to vote for Brandon, but also against what they perceived Paul Vallis to stand for, which was what Brandon did a good job framing him as. If you've got donors who are Republican, friends who are Republican, have talked about contemplating running as a Republican in the past, or your past personal opposition to abortion, there were some people very excited to vote against that.
Well, just wonderful start to the conversation. I have to say, my former colleagues at WBEZ, as I was listening, they reported how the Northwest side and I think the Southwest side were having a flurry of votes coming in. So that made me wonder. But, you know, it is the next generation of both leaders and voters that we're seeing. So speaking of that, my next question for both of you is, Brandon has said that he represents a new movement, not just of progressives, but of civil rights proponents and labor coming together. And AD, I'll stick with you on that. And you know, we love your acknowledgement of being new to Chicago history. That makes us like you. You know, because we like folks who know it all and know where the bodies are buried. So thank you for that. But in your perspective, is that movement the new face, and is there validity to it? A civil rights and a labor, not just progressive movement.
I will never be one to predict where the direction of the city will go, but I think we did see some testing of alliances and how successful they were. And we're going to see in about 10 different ways how this could play out across policing, like we were talking about earlier, across city council, how progressive, our old progressive caucus. So the city council is a progressive caucus that, you know, launched kind of in opposition to Daley, in opposition to Emanuel. And then when Lori Lightfoot came into office, they kind of went away because they had a progressive mayor that they could kind of get behind. So will Brandon Johnson, as kind of the standard bearer of progressivism in Chicago, with all that power that comes with it, plus a more emboldened city council, plus a more emboldened progressive labor movement. I think there's, Delmarie could talk about this too, but kind of a difference between trade labor, which generally backs more conservative pro-development candidates, and progressive labor like CTU and a lot of the SEIU locals, where they will line up and how that will be tested. We're going to have contract negotiations that's going to test this. We're going to have a new Chicago police superintendent that's going to test this. We're going to have to see how involved Brandon Johnson decides to stay at Chicago Public Schools, or whether he says, all right, I've got one more round of appointments to the Chicago School Board, and they're going to be as progressive as I can make them to work with these new elected folks that are going to come into office. This is going to be tested in a bunch of different ways that I won't predict, but winning, I think, helps people band together. And there were a lot of questions about whether progressives could stick together. After this first round, when we had a bunch of progressives running, Chuy Garcia getting in as late as he did, there was a lot of worry about progressive infighting. And I think winning helps make the glue a little bit stickier. But I defer to Delmarie because she's watched how these movements have moved over a while.
Well, thank you, Delmarie. Same question to you. And even, take the time to share your experience about what these movements were, going back to the first time Chuy ran and going way back. So is this a new face, and what are your thoughts?
So I just want to say for a second that AD may be young, but she and I have been connected ever since, practically ever since she's been here. So she comes to a legend, as they call me now, so that only means old. So anyway, 2015 is really when CTU decided to flex its muscle. And I say that because in 2011, when I was doing the city races, we went to CTU to try to get them to endorse in the city races, and they wouldn't. And we were beating them up. My office was beating them up because we're like, what do you mean you won't endorse? Because we thought that was a very important race and they needed to. So that just shows you where they were in 2011. Now, CTU, the militant CTU, as some of the media want to refer to them as, and is a monster that Rahm Emanuel created. And so when he made this off remark to Karen Lewis, that face it, Karen, 25% aren't going to make it anyway. And she took that and was insulted by it. And what he meant by that is 25% will go to charter school, 25% will go to selective enrollment school, 25% will go to private school, and the 25% who aren't going to make it anyway are going to neighborhood schools. And we're going to see that they don't make it because we're going to starve neighborhood schools to death. And so she took umbrage to that, and that's when the war began. And the other part when the war began was when he came in as mayor. And if you remember the fight, he was going to extend the school day. And the legislature had already passed that. It was going to happen anyway. But instead of him waiting to 2013, he was going to do it immediately. And so he started paying principals $150,000 if they would hurry up and do it. And so now only 13 schools did it. But because he put out a release every time one did it, it gave the impression that, there was this groundswell and all these schools are doing it because it's the best thing for education because you people don't know, you're the status quo. And that's what he kept calling CTU, the status quo. So 2015 is when Karen decided she was going to run and take him on herself. Unfortunately, she fell ill. And so she anointed Chuy Garcia, Jesus, who had been at every level of government, but he basically was in the political wilderness. Nobody remembered Chuy Garcia, except those of us who've been out here forever. She elevated him and made him who he is now because she said he can run in my stead. And that was the first runoff. And then we had the next runoff in 2019. and then this runoff in 2023. So there had not been a runoff in all that time, even though we've had nonpartisan elections. And so when you talk about the labor movement, this is, as I said, the monster that the mayor created. And now we see it's coming into its full grown capacity. And it is a monster now. And so they've had their first major victory, even though they've had minor victories in terms of aldermen, they now have a mayor who believes in their same ideology. He's not going to be a tool of theirs, but he certainly has been influenced by them. And he's been influenced by the labor movement and the civil rights movement, which is what Martin Luther King, when he was assassinated April 4th, 55 years to the day of the election, was in Memphis in support of the striking sanitation workers. So this is full circle.
Thank you so much for that. There's a lot of backstory, maybe over drinks, the longer school day, how that was co-opted, as a messaging point for, by Rahm, and so much that can be said about that. But moving to the fact that we came to a runoff, I don't know that anyone was surprised that there would be a runoff, but just one more thought about how it came to be these two candidates. Anything that you would add to that, Delmarie?
Well, I was asked immediately by national reporters what I thought about it, and I thought it was a microcosm of what is happening in the nation in terms of the party being pulled. The party's being pulled in terms of the both wings of the Democratic Party. You've got the progressive wing and you've got a conservative wing. They kept referring to Paul Vallas as a moderate. There was nothing moderate about Paul Vallas. He was a conservative. And he was so conservative that he was a Republican. He was a Democrat in name only. And so that is that's what you see. And I think for Chicago, as much as is wrong with Chicago, and there's a lot wrong, Chicago is so great in so many ways, because look what we did. We elected a progressive. When they talk about New York elected a law and order person. The mayor there is a former police officer. We elected a progressive. Whenever we come push to shove, Chicagoans do the right thing. We've been 35 years wandering in the desert since Harold Washington died, but we did the right thing finally. And we elected a progressive. And since I'm an old progressive with a capital P, I'm very proud of it. I am so happy in this moment that we voted our aspirations, as Stacey said, our hopes rather than our fears.
We also voted someone with kids in CPS.
Absolutely.
We're going to go to AD in just a minute. She's going to share some slides, but I have one more question for you, Delmarie, just also looking at history. One of the things that the young people in my family were sharing with me was that you have students that no matter what coat Paul Vallas put on today, remember him as their leader of schools in the past. So how much sway do you think that these, 37, 35, 40-year-olds had? And how much did his past as, the superintendent of schools have to do with his loss?
Well, I said from the beginning, you could draw a direct line between when he was CEO of CPS and the school closings and the violence in the streets. There's a direct line. I don't care how you look at it. And when you close these schools, not only did you close these schools, but when you created contract schools, you put a lot of middle-class African-American teachers out of work. You made them reapply for those jobs that they already had. And the studies show that the people who replaced them were not only younger with less experience, but they were white. And so they didn't come from the community. And in the Black community, teachers have always been the backbone of the volunteerism in the Black community, because they are the ones who had summer off. They're the ones who had the time off. They're the ones who had a pension, so they could volunteer versus having to look for another job to make ends meet. And so they have children who have children, and those stories get passed down, and people know what happened to the Black middle class thanks to Paul Vallis, Arnie Duncan, and Rahm Emanuel.
All right, thank you for that bit of history. So AD, we're gonna turn it to you to share your slides, a couple more questions, and then folks in the viewing audience on Zoom, get ready for your questions. AD?
Wonderful. Let's see if this works.
Yep, we see it.
All right.
Put it on slide if you, there you go.
There we go. Okay, very quickly, because you guys are all extremely well read and you probably looked at all these statistics already, but just as a reminder to everybody, 30, as of today, we just got updated mail ballot numbers, 609,700 ballots cast, 38% turnout, decent, but not Harold Washington level turnout. So compared to February, it was up. Compared to April 2019, also up. The wide open February election in 2019, not as high as April 2015 runoff against Chuy and Rahm, and somehow not as high as February 2011 when Rahm was basically given the crown by Daley. So we alluded to this a little bit, but what is one of the most interesting parts of this dynamic to me is how much more youth turned out. And these numbers are a little bit old. We haven't updated them with all the mail ballots that have come in, but the point stands regardless that younger people voted more in April than they did in February. So you see about 5,000 18 to 24-year-olds, which is, we need to remember, everyone says 3% turnout among youth, but keep in mind that that's only 18 to 24. That's not that full decade span we have for everybody else. 25 to 34, we see it's up about 17,000 votes. 35 to 44, up about 6. And then you see kind of a decrease in some of these older voters who I maybe wrongly assume, maybe rightly, but a lot of these were Vallis folks, and that might have dug into its margins a little bit. Another fascinating map that I'm sure we'll be studying for a very long time. On your left, we have the February results. On the right, we have April results. So you could see in the areas where Lori Lightfoot did well, she's in blue, that transformed to Brandon Johnson areas on the city south and west side. There was a lot of discussion about how much Black vote would come out to support Brandon and to what extent. I think that was pretty much put to rest. You also see he won these red precincts, which are Willie Wilson precincts. And you see the Latino vote, this purple area on the northwest and southwest sides, split essentially, which we'll talk about in the next slide. I would love to do a story at some point on these bright yellow tide wards to figure out how they ultimately decided who to go with in the next round. There's one down here in the 10th ward as well. It's fascinating. So this is these last two were Tribune slides. This next one is WVEZ, who has done amazing work comparing precinct level race data with voter file data. And here's essentially the breakdown of how each of these turned out different racial categories. So Brandon Johnson obviously took a huge share of the Black vote. Paul Vallis, a larger share of the Latino vote than he did. Vallis also won, I believe, the 11th ward, which is our only majority Asian ward. Fascinating dynamic, and I can't wait to see more reporting about how Latino voters made their decisions. Something I heard a lot, and I'm sure Delmarie heard a lot, and this is true of Black voters as well, is generational differences in how they view crime. And I think Delmarie could speak to that with plenty of authority, but we'll keep going for now. Something Brandon Johnson's going to have to contend with is a new city council. You guys all probably saw all of the coverage of a wave of retirements. This is folks retiring from politics. This is also folks retiring because they had to, because they got indicted. So in 2019, we only had 12 new members, 15 women in 2015, 35 men. That's now up to 18 women on the Chicago City Council. We also have 16 new members. We have our first Alderman Nicole Lee, who was appointed to the seat in the 11th Ward to replace indicted Patrick Daley Thompson, won re-election. And in the 48th Ward, just north of me, which is Edgewater, Lenny Mana Hoppenworth, who's Filipina, also won. So she is one of a couple aldermen who are a different race in the majority race of their ward. 9 LGBT identified members of the city council compared to 6 back in 2019. We also have 7 members of the Democratic Socialists of America, or they were DSA endorsed. And then there are a lot of, folks that are just about as progressive as folks in DSA in terms of their policy priorities align pretty closely with what DSA wants to do. So in 2019, the dynamics were very different. This was an election very much centered around corruption and reform. And this one, like Delmarie talked about, this was a stark division between different sides of the Democratic Party. Do you want a moderate conservative, Daley aligned guy, or do you want a new generation progressive, essentially? So what we're gonna have to watch on this council is, like I mentioned earlier, who ends up on the progressive caucus and how do they line up or not line up with Brandon Johnson. City council also has a history of rubber stamp aldermen who basically align with the mayor regardless to stay in power and get stuff for their wards. So how that shakes out will be really interesting. A lot of the more conservative aldermen, for the most part, what I consider kind of the public safety caucus, secured re-election, and they actually made one gain in the 10th ward, replacing Alderwoman Sue Sedlowski Garza, who was CTU's first big electoral victory back in the day. So a preview of the kind of stuff I'm going to be watching. These are things that I'm sure all of you are watching because we've talked about already. Public safety. We said this race was about public safety over and over, and I think a lot of people thought that meant pro-police. Do we want a law and order guy or not? And I think people discounted maybe that a lot of people think of public safety as everything but police. So what kinds of investments are we making in children, in employment, in returning citizens? And I'm going to be very interested to see where the money goes on that. We have a new Chicago police superintendent, as this group also knows. That search process will be fascinating, the first really community-driven search process we've had in a while. And public perceptions about safety. As someone that used to work at Cranes, I was very aware of how people thought about how safe it was to go downtown or to travel to Chicago in general. What is our national reputation in terms of safety? Are we still called one of the most dangerous big cities? And does that keep businesses and people away? Education, obviously the shift to the elected school board, continued declining enrollment at Chicago Public Schools, which I will point out is not happening just at Chicago Public Schools, but in a lot of big city school districts across the country. The renegotiation of CTU and SEIU's contracts in the coming years, and the hiring and retention of the folks that CTU fought so hard to get hired in their last contract. So counselors, nurses, librarians, how does the district continue to afford that given upcoming fiscal cliffs at the city? We're going to run out of COVID money. CTA also, and Regional Transit Authority also running out of COVID money. Same for CPS. And the ever present and troubling transition of new mayors coming in and discovering a bigger deficit than they thought. I've also got my eye on new developments. We did not talk a ton about housing or zoning or TIFs during forums and debates. It was a lot about public safety and education, but how Brandon Johnson handles these mega developments is something I'm going to be watching really closely. How he handles the casino, what he does or does not do to try to keep the Chicago Bears at Soldier Field. And then of course, crises. Every mayor going back forever faces a crisis they didn't know they were going to have to face. For Lori Lightfoot, it was COVID, it was Hilco, it was this refugee crisis. For Rahm Emanuel, it was his own administration's handling of Laquan McDonald. And then on the other side is just folks I'm watching closely to see what kinds of ties or close alliances they end up making with Brandon Johnson. Is he embraced in Springfield to get through some of the taxes he wants? How does he do with the Chicago City Council? Does he change the approach, do the opposite blueprint of Mayor Lori Lightfoot and actually try to get along with these folks? How does the FOP handle him? Do we end up getting the DNC, which I'd love to hear Delmarie talk about a little bit more? Are progressive groups happy with him throughout? The DSA, for example, made a point to me that we are not, an arm of Brandon Johnson. We're going to be holding him accountable for what he does and doesn't do of his most progressive policies. And then the business community, we saw them go really hard for Paul Vallis. We saw a bunch of Twitter folks threaten to leave, that we're going to see more Boeings, more Citadels leave the city of Chicago under a Brandon Johnson. Does that really happen is something I'm going to be watching. And that is it. So I will stop.
Thank you. And we'll go keep it rolling. I'm going to come back to Delmarie. That was an outstanding overview. And it reminds me of, the races we've seen. The business community said so many things about Kim Foxx. She got reelected, but we remember council wars. Delmarie, do you see any threat of some version of that battle with the mayor happening, or do you see people rallying around where power might lie?
There may be some disagreements among some of the aldermen. For instance, I could see some of the more conservative aldermen on the north side having a problem with Brandon. There's Brendan Riley of the 42nd. It might be Brian Hopkins of the 2nd, who really went all out for Vallis. Who knows about Anthony Beale and Ray Lopez, who wound up, Anthony found his voice after all these years against Lori, and he may try to find his voice again against Brandon. So it's going to be interesting. I think they may face some different pushback, however, this time that they didn't have before, because Lori wasn't really a progressive. She pawned herself off as a progressive, but she wasn't. And so you didn't have the progressive community at her back supporting her the way you're going to have them supporting Brandon. So it's going to be a little bit different dynamic in terms of the community having the back of Brandon, because again, the wicked witch is dead. This is the end of the Daley dynasty in terms of Brandon. This is the first mayor we've had who has no connection to Daley. And so if we had put Vallis in there, coming out of Daley, Rahm Emanuel coming out of Daley, Lori Lightfoot, 6 appointments between Daley and Rahm before she ran for mayor. So this is really, we cut it off. And so I think you're going to have progressives really helping Brandon in many ways to be successful.
Thank you for that. Let's open it up to questions. I've seen some in the chat. I'm going to see if I can help facilitate what I see there, if I can pull it up. And I know that there was one from maybe Julie. You could unmute yourself and ask if you would like. Well, yeah, so yeah, would you please?
I was just wondering, and I don't mean to cut you off guard, AD, that was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate that statistical analysis. I've been wondering myself and have not taken the time to count, so I'm wondering if you have, how many self-described progressives are now on the city council, and particularly compared to 2019? Did we see a significant increase in city council representation?
So this is going to go back. This will go back to what I was saying about the Progressive Caucus kind of being somewhat defunct under Lightfoot. The Progressive Caucus, I believe, had 17 members. Several of them retired, but in many cases, who they were replaced by. So I'm thinking 4th Ward, 5th Ward, 6th Ward. That was Leslie Hairston, Sophia King, Roderick Sawyer, had slightly more progressive or folks that are previous organizers replacing them. We have the same situation in the 14th Ward replacing Burke, the 12th Ward replacing Cardenas, the 26th Ward replacing Maldonado, and to some extent, the same thing happening in 46 and 48. So in 46, James Kappelman, former social worker, and in 48th Ward, Alderman Harry Osterman, who is what we call a Nepo baby. His mom was former alderman. The women that replaced both of them have organizing backgrounds or consider themselves progressive. So I don't know how many I listed there. I think we have 12 remaining members of the Progressive Caucus. We have all 6 DSA people winning again. So we're close to 26, but not quite there, I think. And then we'll just have to see where longtime incumbents shake out. So like I'm watching very closely what someone like Scott Waguespack does, who was progressive in the sense that we thought of progressivism during Rahm Emanuel's tenure, but not as progressive as Brandon is like the shortest way to put it. So where he organizes himself in this next iteration, and if he maintains his current role, the head of the finance committee, is all kind of up in the air. So we have more progressives. I'm not sure how many more, definitely more organizers, at least 5 or 6 new folks come from like the organizing community.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I think when I verbalized.
Thank you for that. I'm not going to have a follow-up, Julia. I joined while you were chatting before. Let me circle back and we'll come back to you if we don't have more questions. But I want to come to Delmarie really quickly on a bit of history, and I'll see what else is in the chat. Delmarie, you know that you could be in the council and everyone is fighting and standing up for their community, and you go back in the chamber, and you as well, AD, and they're like, I'm coming to your barbecue this weekend. You know, there was a lot of performative activity, and in the end, folks were about money and they were about their business partnerships. Second part along those same lines, I know that there was a group that had a PAC that went after Brandon Johnson with their long knives sharpened. And then the minute he was elected, sent out a letter saying they couldn't wait to work with him. So do you think that with this newer generation, and you know, you can answer this as well, AD, will we see change from that old Chicago way of doing things to some truly more inclusive and equitable future? Or will these old forces find a way to stay in power?
Well, I actually think that's why a lot of the Black aldermen who went for Vallis actually went for Vallis, because of the old way of doing things. Unfortunately, we talk about regionalism in terms of doing what's right for a whole community, not just what's right for your ward. But they have made it in the past about, I got the Cop Academy in my ward. I got a Walmart in my ward. I got Discovery Center in my ward, you know, and that's how they look at things. I got the Obama Library in my ward, instead of looking at it as what is best for the region, for all of the wards. And so I think Brandon is going to bring the equitable, invest in people. At least that's what he ran on. And so let's hope that's what he maintains. But it's amazing, as AD was talking earlier about Scott Waguespack, it's amazing the power of chairmanship. We not only saw Scott Waguespack change, we saw Joe Moore of the 49th Ward change before he left after getting a chairmanship. So I just find it amazing, the power of chairmanship. And one of the things I want to say is that Toni Prettwinkle, in the 20 years she was in the city council, never had a chairmanship. Leslie Harrison in 20 years never had a chairmanship, because they were not a yes vote. They were not reliable yes votes. They voted no more than they voted yes, which is why they didn't get chairmanships, which is a carrot. That's why you saw what you saw recently. So we'll see how it pans out when the city council actually votes on these new committees that they all formed for 28, so they could get the vote, which is 26. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, thank you for that little bit of history as well. AD, you can do a quick answer there if you'd like, and then I am going to take some of these questions in the chat.
Delmarie covered it. Let's get to more questions.
Bam. So let's go to Well, let's save how will progressive judge successes as maybe part of a wrap up. But Magnus's question, with the new mayor, will there be any movement towards restoring the CHA members who were displaced 20 years ago, i.e. the Ida B. Wells development, one of the first on the South Side is now Mariano's and not housing. So that deal where there was supposed to be replacement housing, I think you're talking about replacing not members, but property. Is that correct, Betty?
Actually, I was talking about people in houses. Initially, when they tore down the developments, they were going to replace them with housing for CHA residents, middle income and lower income, market property as well. And then all of a sudden, as for there was a Coretta Scott King YMCA and an Ida B. Wells housing development, there is now a Mariano. So there's no way they could build housing there now. I'm just wondering if there's a possibility if, the new mayor could go back and try to do something with these people who are still waiting for housing in the city.
Let's ask that. And the ones who were not relocated to the suburbs.
Exactly.
And, section, the Frenchification of Chicago after Mayor Daley went to Paris. But Delmarie and AD, I will ask yes, and what about housing? Also, what about schools? There's school property as well, where they're waiting for new schools rather than new developments. Do you see any change in either of those areas?
I'll let AD go.
Yeah, I pulled up, as we were talking about this, I pulled up Brandon Johnson's website. He has one of the best sorted websites in terms of issue coverage. And there's a whole section called Hold CHA Accountable, saying CHA failed in its commitment to build the housing it promised more than 20 years ago. That's unconscionable. Brandon will hold the CHA accountable by immediately enacting a freeze on the transfer of CHA land to non-housing issues. So like the Chicago fire property that we heard so much about that was supposed to get redeveloped into housing and instead going to be a practice facility for the Chicago fire. It sounds like nix on that for any future development of its kind. Withhold funding for any CHA project that does not lead directly to housing until the authority makes significant progress toward filling vacancies and develops a plan to fulfill its public housing unit commitment. Homeless preference of CHA, an easily searchable waiting list, which is something I've heard from housing advocates for a very long time. Not only like housing created by where the city helped in a development where they granted zoning approvals, like where are there affordable rentals available in the city, but it sounds like he wants to create like, here's where you are on the waiting list, here's what is available. An independent appraisal of the value of all CHA land, that's another big one. And then auditing the plan for transformation and moving to work program. I would expect we see new leadership at the Chicago Housing Authority. I'm very interested to see what Brandon Johnson does for this proposed South Loop High School, where there are a lot of housing advocates saying, we don't need a school here, we need housing here. We've been asking for affordable housing in this part of the city for a very long time. There are a bunch of other sites that CPS can build on. So those are like two things to watch. Are we not going to have any more Chicago fire situations? And how are we going to approach this South Loop High School differently?
I want to come now to Delmarie. Great job on that. But you give us a nice segue to Lynn Rosenthal's question. Do you know anything, Delmarie, and AD, jump in if you do as well, about how the new administration is shaping up? You can read the chat as well, that Harold did a good job. He had everyone at the table, didn't want to hear from us until everybody was in the room. What do you think Brandon is going to do, both with, the CHA appointment or any of these appointments? I'll start with Delmarie and then AD as well.
Well, I think there's certainly going to be a lot of emphasis placed on those particular areas. I know that Brandon has a good relationship with Jonathan Jackson, who came out, Congressman Jonathan Jackson, who came out and endorsed him. And when you look at the 1st Congressional District, there's certainly a lot of public housing that was supposed to be redone, rebuilt, and in that district that hasn't been. You can imagine that Jonathan Jackson has a relationship with Marcia Fudge, and so who's now the head of HUD. So I think we're going to see some movement that we haven't seen. I mean, I think it's terrible that Ida B. Wells has basically, the land has been vacant for 20 years here, right in the heart of the city on a major boulevard. And so, I mean, I think that's important, especially when you have an alderman like Jeanette Taylor, who wound up finally getting to the top of the list after she was an alderman, after being on the list for 20 some years. And so that just shows you the dereliction in terms of addressing that whole CHA plan for transformation that has just been thrown out the window for the most part. So I think Brandon's going to have a lot of people, as he said, people are already submitting resumes, and he's going to have his pick of whoever there is, the cream of the crop. And I think it's going to be very interesting for all of us to see.
I know that our folks would love to hear what we can do to help, but I'm going to come back up to the question from Ellen Partridge and also invite you, to wrap in any of your closing remarks as well. How will progressives judge Brandon's success in the first year? And Delmarie, I'll stay on you.
I think keeping some of your promises, keeping your campaign promises. I mean, one of the things Lori Lightfoot did was she ran as a progressive and then got in there and wasn't. I mean, her campaign promises, like elect a school board, she fought it tooth and nail. When it came to the Police Oversight Commission, she fought that tooth and nail. And so, those are the things, even the TIF money, the $2.4 billion that they gave to Project 78 and Lincoln Yards. I mean, she cut a deal at the very beginning because that probably would have been the first major fight of her administration, and it might have been a loss. And so she cut a deal that they were going to hire more Black people to make sure that at least we got something out of it. I mean, how has that shaped up? So, I think that's how you're going to measure Brandon, by do you keep your campaign promises? And I think there's going to probably be more scrutiny of him to keep his campaign promises.
Yeah, I was just going to say a few ordinances to watch out for, basically like his 100-day plan. Bring Chicago Home, which is raising the real estate transfer tax to create a dedicated stream of funding for homelessness. Whether he does that through Springfield or via referendum down the line, we'll have to see. Treatment Not Trauma, which is sending clinicians basically to respond to certain mental health calls. Recreating the Department of the Environment is another big one that I know progressives have been talking about for a long time and seems to be getting more urgent with all of the storms and climate change issues we're seeing here in the city. And then we got to see what he does with his first budget. He pledged not to cut the Chicago Police Department by 1 penny. Does that mean that he keeps it completely flat, or does he let it go up a little bit with inflation? And then how much money does he put toward the social services that he was promising, including youth employment, which he said was like a big part of his 100-day plan? Do we have work for youth, especially during the summer and year round, is what he's promised.
That is all fascinating. I would also add he had an economic plan for youth that I know people will want to watch. And there's a ComEd franchise deal that has to be dealt with. And you laid out all the money that's going away. Do either of you see any rifts with Springfield or with that godfather in Sensible Shoes, Tony Preckwinkle? and I'll stay, she's my girlfriend, I can say it, I hope. I'll stay with you on that, Delmarie, because I see you.
Well, I mean, she's certainly going to have some influence. That's for sure. How much influence is another thing, because there are going to be some other people who who are going to be fighting for influence as well. So that it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think that all of it is going to be interesting to watch. We're all going to have a front row seat to what's going to happen. And I think there are a lot of people, as I said before, there's a lot of issues out here. AD just ticked them off. And there's so many people who are activists on those specific issues who are going to hold Brandon's feet to the fire. So I don't think one person, as much as they might want to be an outside influence, will be as much of an outside influence as they think, because I think the people really understand that this is our last shot. And especially the Black community, we've been on life support here. And so we got to have action. This cannot be, just rhetoric anymore. We've got to have action.
Thank you. That's a beautiful place to end it. And what about you, AD, Springfield County, and your last thoughts?
We've already seen the tiniest bit of pushback from Governor J.B. Pritzker over Brandon Johnson's proposal for a financial transactions tax, which I've been calling a LaSalle Street tax since I came here. Pritzker, of course, comes from that VC investment world and doesn't want to see what these companies have been threatening, which is basically, hey, so much of this is digital. We can just pull up stakes and go to the suburbs or go to a different state. So the tiniest gap there, but also Pritzker has said how exciting this is for Chicago more broadly, how this might boost our chances to bring the DNC here. I think any more openness from Johnson is a refreshing departure from what we saw with Lightfoot, who so often was a fighter, essentially, had a really hard time building coalitions and getting things done. Johnson also comes into office with a ton of Springfield endorsements from progressives, as expected. We'll see how that manifests in DC too. If those relationships with HUD and with Congressman Garcia, with Congressman Jackson come through and help in the same way Rahm Emanuel really milked his DC ties to get us a lot of federal money for stuff. But yeah, there's always going to be divisions. And I think progressives especially like holding their elected officials' feet to the fire.
Well, thank you. What advice do you all have, and how can Chicago women take action, advocate? We want to push transportation, I see in the chat, but any other thoughts that you'd like to add there, either of you?
Well, I think the issues that certainly are important to women, and those are beyond just reproductive rights. I mean, it has to do with public education. That's certainly an issue. Public safety is an issue. Transportation is an issue. All of those, housing is an issue. All of those things, good jobs are an issue. So all the things that women, especially in the Black community, when you're single head of household, there's so many of us who are single head of household. And so all of those issues that are important, or meat and potato issues, are going to be front and center, and Brandon is going to have to address them. Of course, he can't do them overnight, but if we start seeing any progress, that will keep him in that office.
Well, help women and you help the world. Thank you both. I'm going to turn it back over to our leader, Jackie Grimshaw. It was a pleasure to speak with you and to hear your wisdom, and to know we've got generations of wisdom. We're in good hands on all fronts. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Sylvia. Great moderation there. So I have one question before I close. You both have been watching Brandon's campaign closely. And in addition to those appointments that we have to have in the cabinet and in boards and commissions and so forth, it's also important what kind of kitchen cabinet he has. So from your watching him, who do you think might be his advisors who are not, well, may or may not be in the government, but definitely will be able to influence him? I know you think Tony Preckwinkle, Delmarie, and you're probably right, but I wonder if there are any other people that you think might be in that advisory capacity as kitchen cabinet.
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think one of the things he said is his election is the culmination of the civil rights movement and the labor movement. And I think that's where you're going to see his influence. It's going to come from the civil rights movement and the labor movement. So we know who those civil rights figures are: Jesse Jackson, You're going to have Jonathan Jackson. You're going to have some of the pastors, Reverend Acree, Reverend Hatch, Reverend Trotter. You're going to have a mixture of old school and new school coming together with old ideas and new ideas, because you've got to have somebody who's been there, done that, and who can share that experience with you. I mean, as you know, you've got to have somebody who knows how to get to the bathroom. And so those are the people who I think he's going to turn to. And he seems to be open to that. And I think being a teacher, and as he says, being one of 10 children negotiating for one bathroom, I think he's open to collaboration and receiving information from a lot of sources.
Okay, I got you, AD.
Agreed on all counts. I think the public perception is that Stacey Davis Gates will remain a very close confidant. They are friends. They are brother and sister from the way I've seen them around each other. I would expect Diane Palmer from SEIU. I would expect Emma Tai, who's the executive director of United Working Families. Folks that have been around council for a while that backed him early, Carlos Ramirez Rosa, Pat Dowell, who is someone if you told me 4 or 5 years ago that she would endorse Brandon Johnson early, I would have been very surprised. I think she'll try to counsel him as best she can from like the progressive, but I don't know the right word. Delmarie has a better one for me. Pragmatic and
right.
She's been around council for a very long time, so she knows how to navigate it. Who that ends up being from the policy side, I'll be fascinated. But yes, as Delmarie said, pastors. This is like one of our first and most vocal people of faith leading this city. So I think we saw Rahm Emanuel have a lot of press conferences where pastors were in the background, but I think they'll be even more at the forefront in a Brandon Johnson administration.
And I've enjoyed this conversation. You guys really, I think, enlighten us. Yeah, Aileen says, give you a hand. Absolutely. A hand, because you know, the thing is that you go through the wars and you focus on the day-to-day kind of stuff during the campaign, but then you have to step back and say, what was it all about? And where are we going? And what can we feel good about? And what should we be cautious about as well? So I think you have prepared us for the future. So I thank you both. And with that, you know, we said we like to end around 7. So I want to keep you, keep our commitment to our participants and to our guests. But thank you very much. We really had a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, again as well. Okay, bye-bye.
I wouldn't miss this. See you later, everyone.